Hey, it's Rachel with Restorations by Rachel. Welcome to my channel. Today I will be working on this beautiful Eastlake dresser. Now it is tiny, but I feel like it is mighty with the details that it has. I love this curved front, this beading detail down here, and then the hardware. I bought it several months ago, actually. I plan for it to be in my youngest daughter's room. I actually just put it up there, but was like, I will get to this later. But this is going to be part of an Ivy Lane Interiors challenge. This is my third challenge that I'm doing with her. It's Into the Woods. So each piece has to be finished like wood only. So you could do a paint wash, you can do a stain. I am going to lighten it. That's my plan, and clean up the hardware. And there are some scratches on the top, some things I gotta to clean up. But I didn't quite want this orangey brown finish for my daughter's room. So I'm really excited to get it cleaned up and give it a new look. And I think it's going to go great in her room. So let's get started.
So the handles all have like square nuts that I can't get it off with by hand, so I'm gonna have to get some needle nose pliers or something to try to loosen those.
Since these are in with tack nails, I'm gonna try to gently pull them out. They're coming out. That one's coming out easy. Trying to pull them out without bending these little plates. I was a little concerned with how it would go getting those plates out, but it went really easy. So my plan is to just sand all the flat surfaces, like the drawers. I have those out, obviously. And then the top. And then like for down here where I have this beaded detail, and then the sides where it's kind of planked, I want to strip that so it's a little bit easier to sand. The stripper I'm going to use is Green Easy stripper. It's nice because it's a safer stripper to use. So that's not one that like I feel like I need to wear a mask or anything with. So I like to, especially on the vertical sides, I like to put it in just this tin pan, and I have a brush that I always keep in there for stripping. Got a glove. This stripper, it's soy-based, so you always want to follow it up with a cleaner. Anytime you're stripping, you want to follow it up with a cleaner, but I'm going to put a good thick layer on here. The bottle says like 2 to 4 hours for it to hang out on there to work, but I've had luck within about an hour. But this will be staying on here for at least 2 hours because I will be leaving soon to go to my son's baseball game. So I figured this is a good time to put stripper on and let it hang out. I might have to reapply some when I get back because it does have a tendency to dry out. But I mean, part of that is just drying out from it absorbing the stain, lifting that up that's on there. But you want to be good and generous with what you put on there because otherwise it won't come off very easily.
I did the same method of applying stripper around the rest of the front and then on the other side.
Okay, it's been a little over 2 hours, and I did a little test area just to make sure that it was, ready to get off. And so I have a couple of scrapers that I like to do or like to use, and then I'll put it just into this box when I'm finished. Some areas, especially the corners, I'll need to scrub. I have like a softer bristle, and this is like a medium, and then I have this brush. I have like the whole kitchen sink. Some quadruple zero steel wool. That's when I'll come in with the finishing cleaner, and then I have a bucket of water nearby that I can rinse my brushes in as I go. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's coming off quite as well as I'd hoped, but it is what it is.
For whatever reason, these
flat blade scrapers were not doing the trick on getting off the old finish and the stripper. So you could see that I started with one and then I switched to another. It still wasn't working, and then I ended up switching to my bigger brush, and that was what finally worked. Sometimes you just have to experiment with the tools and accessories that you have and figure out what works best, because these scrapers had worked well for me on previous projects where I was stripping off paint or stain, but it didn't here. So, you know, who knows why it did or didn't, but I'm glad the brush worked well. You'll see me intermittently dipping the brush into water to help rinse off the stripper gunk that just really gets caught up in all those bristles. And I'll use a paper towel to try to clean it off. That's the only thing that's kind of annoying about the brush, but as you could see, it was very effective. Then I used a paper towel to do my first pass of kind of wiping off the excess stripper, and then I would come in with Green Easy's finishing cleaner to spray on there and brush it down with the steel wool pad, before then giving it a final wipe down with some water and a paper towel. For the front, I used the brush as well, and just the same process to get it all cleaned up. For the flat surfaces that I left to sand only, I'm using an 80 grit sanding disc. I love these 3M sanding discs. If you have not tried them out, I highly recommend them. They're very durable, and I rarely have problems with swirl marks with them, and I think that's saying a lot since I've had trouble with other even good brands leaving swirl marks. And I'll even put this on my Surf Prep sander as well. You'll see me doing that later. I just like them so much, and they are compatible on there even though they're circular versus a rectangle. So sanding this top ended up taking me forever. You can see where I'm even starting that it's just a lot of that top coat on there still that I've got to get through first, then to get to the stain. And oak's just a hard wood, so that's also going to take a little bit longer to sand. So if I had to go back and do this again, I would have stripped the top before sanding. I think it would have saved me a lot of time. And because this took so long, I ended up for the drawer fronts deciding to go ahead and strip them. I did want to do a comparison, just say, you know, hey, I have these two eco-friendly strippers that I've used in the past, but I've not compared them side by side on the same finish. So I did a little test run of that. I'd say between the two that I leaned toward the Smart Strip. That worked really well. They both worked about the same with the amount of finish that they got off, but I did like that Smart Strip as a paste. And so if you're working on a vertical surface, that's not going to drip as much on you and not be as messy. Once the wood was good and dry the next day, it was time to sand what finish remained. I started with a 120 grit. Since it's solid wood, I probably could have started with 80 grit, but this worked fine. So my goal with starting with the 120 is to get as much of the finish off as possible, and then my subsequent grits of 180 and then 220 will be to refine the scratch marks and get it nice and smooth. And since the inside of the drawer boxes were pretty nasty with stripper residue, dirt, dust, all those things, I went ahead and cleaned those up as well. And this is probably a matter of preference, but I decided to sand back the sides of the drawers too so they would be lighter like the rest of it. The top had a couple pretty deep gouges that needed to have the stain removed, so I just let some strippers sit in that for a couple hours and then cleaned that out, and it worked really well. I don't plan to fill and repair these holes. I view it as part of the character that comes with the age of the dresser. Before I go in to sand these areas, it's looking like some of the stripper has kind of seeped back out. It's like darker there. So I want to go over it with some acetone and scrub that down. And I think it will also help with maybe loosening up or getting rid of some of this excess stain, because these areas are just more challenging, cumbersome to sand. So I'm going to see if this acetone will help, and I'll use it on the detailing here as well. Thankfully, I noticed with that section that the acetone seemed to be turning it a greenish color, so then I switched to soapy water to work on getting the residue from the stripper out. While those areas dried, I used a medium grit foam attachment on my Surf Prep sander to sand all the curved areas. Some areas around the top were being a bit stubborn, so then I used my orbital sander with the foam attachment. And the reason I switched to that is that it's a bit more aggressive with how much it takes off. I always like to start with the Surf Prep sander because that's a little bit safer, and then if I need to step up the game a little bit, so to speak, then I can switch to the orbital sander. Then I was able to circle back to those areas that I had cleaned up with the soap and water and acetone. I'm still using 120 grit here. For these areas that I could not get with my sander, I am using my contour sanding kit, using this little guy, and then I'm just going to wrap my sandpaper around it. I have 120 that I'm going to start with. And then just sand in it. You can see it's getting rid of that orangey brown that's there. This doesn't fit very well in there, but I'll do my best. I just want to point out here that you can see I'm now wearing my respirator. I didn't have it on at first when I was talking, but I could see that dust flying, and that's something you want to be very mindful of, especially as often as I'm working on furniture. You don't want to be exposing yourself to that sanding dust. So please make sure you're protecting your lungs if you're doing any work that's similar to this. So I feel like I'm finally to the point of kind of having that initial, like, get all the old finish off, stripping, sanding stage. There are a few spots up here where it's like darker that I will take the 120 grit to still, but then after that I'm gonna do 180 and then probably 220 before finishing it. I am thinking, so I saw a lady, local lady who refinishes furniture. I saw one of her listings pop up, and she had an antique oak dresser that I was like, you know what, that looks like she didn't stain it all, that she probably just put a top coat on there. And so I reached out to her. She's very kind to respond. She said, yeah, I just put a matte top coat, poly top coat on there, and I would just love the look of it. So I'm thinking that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try that. If I don't like the look of it, that's fine. I can pivot and go back to a paint wash. But I don't know. I'm excited to try that, something different. And so get going on getting closer. So one trick, if you want to see what your wood would look like if it was just sealed, is to wet it, and it will take on the color that it would if you just put a top coat. You can see I kind of already did this, but my first round, my mic died, so I didn't have the audio, but this kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like. It's, you know, obviously still a little bit darker in some of the open grain part versus some others, but I just love the character, and it kind of tells its age and history that still is. You know, I've sanded pretty well on this, but some of that stain's kind of, the old stain is deep down in that grain, but I don't know. I'm just excited for it to be just a little bit different and little imperfect, and that'd be okay. So I'm going to keep sanding, like I said, and you know, excited to be that much closer with getting finished, and for sure having all of that sanding, the majority of it behind me. I am a little concerned with how this top is going to look. I've sanded this down with 180, but it seems like this front piece is a lot darker than the rest. So I don't know if I might end up having to do the paint wash just to get it to look a little bit more uniform. Let's see what it looks like. I mean, probably looks worse on camera, but that's not too bad. I need to clean it, obviously, too, get all this sanding dust. Probably should have vacuumed over it first. This will help raise the grain, too, for the 220 sanding. I don't know. All right, I'm going to continue on as planned. Something I noticed when I was going through my sanding grids is that in all these little cracks here, that there was a lot of just old finish with stripper and sanding dust stuck down in there. And so I'm using this little pick kit that I have. Basically, it looks like dental tools, but I've used it so many times, and it's really great for getting down into crevices like that you basically could never do with, you know, by yourself or with sanding. And so I'm just going along and scraping all of it out and using my vacuum to suck it up as I go. And I'll link it in my description, but this kit's literally only $5 and super handy, so very much worth it if you're going to be refinishing furniture, in my opinion. Remember that time I said I was just going to go for the top coat rustic look? Well, as I was sanding, I changed my mind again. So my plan, though, is to just do a paint wash, one round of it on the top for tonight. It's late. I'm like so ready for bed. But I want to put this on here, let it dry overnight, and just be able to get a good look at it. And if I don't like it, I'll just sand it back. It won't be that big of a deal. So this is 1 part paint, 4 parts water. I'm using Turtle Dove Taupe by Melange Paints, or paint. It's just somewhat light neutral. Used it before on some pieces. So it's good to kind of have something that you can stir it with so that the paint doesn't settle to the bottom. I have a deck brush because that's going to let me cover more area all the faster. So got my Mr. bottle too. I'll just give it a real light misting over the top. That'll give me even more time to work. And then I have these lint-free like shop towels that I can wipe off the excess. So here we go. I'm curious, for those of y'all who are watching and refinish furniture yourself, do you change your mind like so many times, or keep thinking about like, is this really what I want to do as you're working on a project? I feel like I'm like that, you know, maybe half the time. Just not 100% sure. You kind of have a vision in mind, but not sure if it's going to play out the way you want it. But you never know till you try, right? And the reason that I wanted to try out the paint wash is that I wasn't 100% happy with how much I was able to strip and sand off. Just felt like it was maybe looking a tiniest bit blotchy in some areas. So just wanted to even out the tone a bit with putting a paint wash on there. All right. Get a good coat on there. I'm going to start wiping back this excess. You want to wipe with the grain. one little spot there. Do you like how this is lightening it up?
And now I'm just going around making sure there aren't any drips on the edges and wiping that back and making sure that the top looks even without any streaks.
Okay, let's let this dry overnight and see how it looks. I've decided I like the paint wash look, so I'm going to go through and do it on the rest of it. I made some more solution. Again, you want to make sure you're stirring it, because before, if I when I did a paint wash, if I wasn't stirring it, it got darker as I went on, so I had to correct that. Where are my? There they are. This is pretty messy on vertical surfaces, so I'm gonna try to be neat as possible. I love how this thing just continuously sprays. You get a pretty good spray out of all that. And it's not really heavy, which is good because you don't want to just be like a ton of water. All right, let's go to town.
As I'm going along, I'm trying my best to get in all those nooks and crannies with the slats here, but then also being very careful to not get over on the other side, the front side of the dresser, because if I do, I could easily forget about it and then it dries and looks weird if I haven't wiped it back in time. So just some things you have to think about, because it is pretty messy since it's watery. So you have to be mindful of what areas you're getting as you go.
It's like a cream paint that I've watered down. It'll look like this once you wipe it back. You want to do some? Let's do it on a drawer.
You'll get to see her learning that here in a bit, and you'll get to see that it really is a pretty simple process. But here I am, right now I'm getting the rest of this side done, and then I'm wiping it back just like I did on the top, making sure to get all the excess and wipe it back where there aren't any streaks. Then I realized I unfortunately forgot to do that top edge, so I had to go back and be very careful as I did that part. So now it's my daughter's turn. She was having a little trouble with squeezing the misting bottle at first, so I had to help out. But, overall she did great. She was squirting a little bit too close, so then I was kind of wiping to smooth it all out to make it a bit even. Before I hit record on this drawer, I had given her a little bit of a lesson on a previous drawer of what I was doing. So right now I'm just getting off any of the excess so it's not super drippy. And then she's having a go at it, and she did really well. She was cute. She was showing me on the sides where it was dripping so I could wipe that back. But I just had to coach her on making sure she wiped with the grain and not against it. But she did really great. I was really proud of her. And I think it's really extra special that she practiced on this dresser that is going in her room.
After doing the small drawer, she tried one of the larger drawers, and she already was getting better with the sprayer, and I did have to, smooth it out again for her a bit, but she did really great. And I'd say the only area that I really helped her with was wiping it back. I think just since it's a larger surface, it was hard for her arm to go all the way across. And if you picked it up early, then it would leave kind of a splotchy mark of where you picked up your rag. So I helped her there, but overall she picked it up really quickly. Once it was dry, it was time to knock back the grain that raised from using that wet paint wash. I'm using a 400 grit sanding sponge and just going over really lightly. I don't want to take off any of the paint wash that I've put on there, but this will help smooth it out before I put on the top coat. Now it's time for top coat. I'm using Minwax polyacrylic, and for my settings on my Flexio 5000, I have the air blowing just at a 2, and then I have the flow only open a little bit. But I did some test passes before on another sheet of cardboard before I'm spraying on here. So the process is really fast and simple. I'm just trying to overlap my passes by a little bit, but I'm also not spraying very heavy. You can go a little bit heavier on the top where you have the horizontal surfaces, but if anything's vertical, you don't want to go too heavy-handed because then you'll get drips and then you'll hate yourself because it's a pain to sand back. And a lot of times you could end up sanding back your finish and then trying to figure out how to fix that. So it's always best to just go a little bit lighter. And if you have to do an extra coat, then do an extra coat. It's not that much time or effort. In total, I did 3 coats of the top coat, sanding with the 400 grit sanding sponge in between. Next, I cleaned the hardware with Barkeeper's Friend and a steel wool pad, and you can see how beautiful it looks. I was so grateful that every part of the hardware cleaned up really beautifully. I will often have some pieces that look great, but then others not so great. But as a whole, these looked really beautiful, so I kept it as is. Some of them aren't perfect, but I think it also goes with the overall look of the dresser of having that beauty and charm of its age. All right, y'all, it is finished, but let's take a look back at where we started. Such a beautiful dresser, even where we started, but it just wasn't quite the tone and look that I wanted for my daughter's room. But after getting it all stripped down and putting on that paint wash, here it is now. It honestly couldn't have turned out any better for her room. I love how the paint wash lightened it, and it still has that beautiful character from the wood and original design. And I absolutely love how the hardware turned out. My daughter has loved having it in her room. She got all of her clothes in there immediately, which really warmed my heart. But enough about what I think about it. I would love to hear what you think. So let me know in the comments, and I will give the full reveal of how it looks in her room. I have a bed frame that I'm planning to refinish for her. It's an antique Jenny Lynn bed frame. So once I have that done, do a video, I'll show you what they look like together in her room. Thank you so much for watching this video in its entirety. If you've not already subscribed, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and follow along, and I'll see you next time.